This is the third lecture for topic 8, and in this we're going to focus on pornography. According to Pornhub, a popular pornography website, lots of us like to consume porn. In 2018, Pornhub dropped about 10 years worth of user data. So it kind of gave us insight into who looks at porn, at least through Pornhub, and other information about their user data. According to their research, that this is worldwide, but every second, an estimated 56,000 people are watching internet porn. And that's ladies too. So a lot of times we sort of think about porn is more of something that guys do, but according to Pornhub, their users are about 75% men and 25% women. And in fact, their data shows that women spend once they're on a porn site, they spend more time on the porn site. So just something to keep in mind. It's also big business in the United States. It's hard to determine revenue of the porn industry, in particular because DVDs aren't sold anymore. Videos, most people get their information, get their pornography on the internet. So it's kind of hard to determine the revenue of the private corporations. But Forbes estimated that they thought that the annual revenue of porn producers in the United States was anywhere between $6 billion a year and $15 billion a year. And when you think about that in comparison to other high revenue generators in the United States, depending on the high and the low there of 6 to 15, it's on par with the amount of revenue that the NFL and the NBA and the Major League Baseball generate, and as much as Netflix as well. So porn, we like to watch it. Porn, big business. Now, as we see with prostitution, that we see that pornography aligns up with the debate over regulation of pornography, lines up along the moralist libertarian axis. And then, as we also know, that feminists align themselves within those viewpoint axes. The radical feminists more likely to align themselves with the moralists, and the liberal feminists more likely to align themselves with the libertarian viewpoint. So moralists view, not surprisingly, since it's more of a conservative and more of a religious viewpoint, they view porn as being very harmful, immoral, degrading, and as such should not really be treated as speech, that it's sort of like harassment, it's harmful expressions, and therefore it should be subject to state regulations. Libertarians, not surprisingly, think that the depiction of erotic behavior, pornography, is free expression and it should be protected by the First Amendment, right? And so, two very different viewpoints, and you're going to see in a moment how feminists align themselves with these viewpoints. Pornography is loosely defined as material of a sexual nature that brings about sexual arousal. And pornography, most pornography receives First Amendment protection. So when you think about clips that you might watch on Pornhub or 50 Shades of Grey or Playboy or other movies that you might watch on late night on HBO, whatever, most of those that type of pornography is receives First Amendment protection. However, there is a narrow subset of pornography that falls outside of First Amendment protections. In other words, it's not considered speech, and therefore it can be prohibited and greatly regulated. And those two subsets of pornography are what is known as obscene material and also child pornography. Both of these two things do not receive First Amendment protection, and they can be regulated. They can, as we know, child pornography is a crime. It can be criminalized. So, what is obscenity? A justice on the Supreme Court was once asked that question, that they responded with a funny response. Justice Potter Stewart said that he has a hard time defining what obscenity is, but he knows it when he sees it. And I bring that up because it is up to the Supreme Court to tell us and to define obscenity, because if it's obscene, then it can be regulated. And in order to do that, the Supreme Court has come up with tests that they use to define what is in fact obscene material. And in doing that, they actually sat and watched pornographic movies in order to get a sense of what is pornography and what is obscenity. And in the famous book by Bob Woodward called The Brethren, it's a book that looks at like sort of the behind the scenes of the Supreme Court. He writes about how in the 1960s and 70s, when there was a proliferation of the production of pornography as a result of the sexual liberation movements, the Supreme Court's actually gathered for movie day with their clerks, and they popped up popcorn, and they would actually sit and watch pornography in order to determine what was in fact obscene. And that's where that famous line from Justice Potter Stewart comes from. Out of these endeavors, the Supreme Court has created a test to give us some guidance in what is defined as obscene material. And it's known as the Miller test, and it was created in the 1970s. And it's sometimes seen as sort of a compromise between the moralist point of view and the libertarian point of view. So the Miller test says that obscenity is work that, taken as a whole, appeals to prurient interests. And that means like unnatural or unwholesome sexual desire. So that's where you see a little bit of the moralist viewpoint there. And it also depicts sexual conduct in a patently offensive way. Again, moralist. And that that you use the standards in your community to determine whether or not it is patently offensive and whether or not it brings about unwholesome desire. And so if you're using the community of New York City, that might be very different than the community in Danville, Illinois, right? I'm not saying which is more pornographic, or which is more accepting of pornography, but it depends on the community that you live in. Again, sort of tipping the hat to the moralist perspective. But from the libertarian perspective, it says that that you have to take the work as a whole, and that that the whole work has to have absolutely no serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, right? And so that kind of opens the door to say, yeah, it might have something in this work that's patently offensive and appeals to prurient interest, but taken as a whole, it is a work of art, and therefore it's communicating an important artistic message, and therefore it would be protected by the First Amendment. Okay, so how does feminism enter into this debate over pornography? Well, we see two distinct camps, the radical feminists and the liberal feminists. And so in the 1970s, as we see the increase in the production of pornography, some radical feminists were really alarmed by what they viewed as increasingly violent and degrading imagery of women that was used in pornography. And they made the move to say that this kind of degrading and violent portrayal of women in pornography should not be just viewed as pornography, but it should be viewed as obscene material, and that it should be prohibited. The argument comes from, these are some of the feminists that they reference in your textbook: Andrea Dworkin, McKinnon, and Brownmiller. These are radical feminists who were really wanting the prohibition of violent and degrading images of women in pornography. Basically they said that these depictions of women prop up patriarchy, that it views women as subservient to men, views men as powerful and dominating over women. And for them, again, radical root, they want to uproot patriarchy. And the way you do that is you dismantle the tools of patriarchy. And they saw pornography as a part of that. They also thought that pornography is sort of feeds into the practice of rape and rape culture. And so they basically say that pornography is the theory, and that when you look at pornography, it communicates to you that it's okay to treat women in this way, and then you take that theory and you put it in the practice in terms of acts of rape. And they also see this kind of pornography or obscenity as designed to degrade and dehumanize women. Now, they made the claim that this type of pornography was linked to criminal sexual violence against women. And that was probably the strongest argument that they were trying to make, because they basically sort of took this expression outside of, oh, we're just trying to communicate an idea. And they were saying, no, like harassment, like slander, like fighting words, pornography is designed to harm. And it does harm, because the more pornography you watch, the more likely you are to engage in sexual violence against women. That is not true, okay? They argued that in the 1970s and 80s, but studies have demonstrated that the evidence does not support this claim. And so just recently, there was new research findings published in the Journal of Trauma, Violence, and Abuse, suggesting that there is no connection between pornography consumption and sexual violence. The actions that the radical feminists wanted to take was working at the local level. They wanted to pass local ordinances that prohibited sexual depictions of women in degrading and violent ways, whether that was in magazines, whether that was in movies, whether that was in artwork. That was their goal in terms of their policy agenda. Liberal feminists oppose the radical feminist approach. They do oppose the degrading images that were appearing in pornography in the 1970s and the 80s. But they really did not think that the answer to this problem was censorship. In fact, they really viewed censorship as maybe worse than the disease of these degrading images, because if you empower the government to shut down expression, sexual expression, then the norms that are in place that reinforce sexual stereotypes, those are likely to stay in place, even though you might have shut down pornography. So from the liberal feminist perspective, they want to think about pornography as speech and subject to all of the protections of the First Amendment. And just like how you don't want to shut down hate speech, you want to meet hate speech with speech that is countering the hateful message. And so liberal feminists wanted to do the same with pornography. They say that sexual expressions in depicting sex can be used in a harmful way, but it can also be used in a way that sends a positive, pro-sex, pro-feminist message about sexuality. And so the liberal feminists want to use pornography as free expression to empower women to define sexuality on their own terms. They want to meet speech with speech. They want to challenge people to think differently about pornography, and not to see pornography as a tool of degradation, but to see pornography as a tool of female liberation. Okay? They also really didn't like the radical feminists' approach to pornography, because they felt that it reinforced negative feminist stereotypes. That is that women are prudes, that women are anti-sex, that women are, perpetual victims of the pornography industry. They didn't want to reinforce that message, and so they wanted to empower women through the use of pornography rather than shutting pornography down and reinforcing negative stereotypes about feminism. Okay, so in conclusion, where do you stand? Who do you think makes a better argument? Radical or libertarian or liberal feminists? Third wave feminists really are sort of split in terms of being a little bit from the radical feminist camp and a little bit from the liberal feminist camp as well. They see the internet as a liberating marketplace, right? That the internet, anybody can make porn, they can put it on the internet, and that it liberates the depiction of sexuality from the market control, because the internet is a much freer market, they argue. And that the internet can be used to create a new feminist sexual identity. And so in that way, they're in the liberal feminist camps. However, they still see much of the internet porn as degrading, and they are aware that young people coming into sexuality, that they report feeling pressure to imitate porn in dating life, and how it's kind of skewing young people's understanding of sexual interaction because a lot of times people's first interaction with sex comes through internet and comes through sort of negative portrayals or degrading portrayals or sort of stereotypical portrayals of sex. And so third wave feminists are sort of saying, maybe this is more about social regulation, that you don't want the government involved, but maybe there needs to be sort of a social movement to challenge and think more critically about the way that pornography displays and sexuality on the internet. All right, thanks for listening.